Occasionally, riggers must move extremely large and heavy loads and place them with pinpoint accuracy. Cranes may not have the capacity, the room, or the precision necessary for the assignment. When that's the case, there may be more than one way of doing the job. A combination of different equipment and procedures can be required. But safety has to be the first and foremost consideration, since a mishap in moving a heavy load can be catastrophic. This tape deals with some of the equipment available to the rigger for precise handling of heavy loads. We will look at the characteristics and safe use of jacks, blocking and cribbing, rollers, inclined planes, jacking towers and portable gantries, and skidding systems. Although all of you may not be involved in moves of the scale we are about to see, the basic operating procedures can be applied to other jobs. Jacks are used for precise placement of heavy loads or to lift loads a short distance above a firm surface. Two types are commonly used in construction: ratchet and lever jacks, and heavy-duty hydraulic jacks. The ratchet jack works on the same principle as the bumper jacks found in most automobiles. Ratchet jacks are usually limited to loads of under 20 tons because of the physical effort required to operate them, but they are relatively inexpensive and operate quickly. The pumps powering hydraulic jacks may be contained in the jacks or as separate units to be operated at a safe distance from the load. Both types of jacks are marked with load capabilities and should not be loaded beyond their nameplate capacities. Use blocks between the jack and load to avoid damage to the surface. Jacks should never be used at an angle. Use shims or wedges to keep the blocks vertical. Don't use jacks for long-term support. Blocking and cribbing is much more stable. Hydraulic jacks that are leaking oil should not be used until they have been repaired. Don't put water in a hydraulic jack because it may freeze. Use hydraulic oil. Lift loads a little at a time on one end only and follow closely with the blocking. Never lean over the handle of a ratchet or lever jack unless you are holding it. Don't use extensions or cheaters on the handle supplied with jacks. When lifting has been completed, remove the jack handles. Blocking timbers are used to support heavy loads or as a foundation for jacks. They may be used singly or in tiers to form cribbing. Cribbing is used where it's necessary to gain height and stability or to reduce bearing pressure by distributing the load over a greater area. Timbers should be large enough and of a suitable type of wood for the load. Douglas fir and white oak are often used, and in some cases, an exotic African hardwood, Eki, is used because of its durability and compactness. The two main considerations in blocking operations are stability and bearing pressure. To ensure stability, the height of the cribbing should not exceed the length of the timbers used. For example, Cribs built with 4-foot timbers should be no more than 4 feet high. Blocking and cribbing should have enough area in contact with the ground or floor so that the bearing capacity is not exceeded and there is no chance of settlement. Rigid steel or hardwood mats can be used between the cribbing and the ground surface to distribute the load and reduce the bearing pressure. For extremely heavy loads, use solid layers of timbers for the cribbing. This will distribute the load over more timbers and prevent damage by crushing. Center loads on blocking and cribbing to ensure that the load is transmitted evenly to the ground. Cribbing is frequently used with jacks for lifting loads in stages. Cribbing is built up so that jacks contact the pickup points in their lowered position. One end is then jacked just enough to allow a small piece of blocking to be inserted between the load and cribbing, in this case 2 inches. The process is repeated at the other end. The jacks at the first end are then lowered, and another piece of 2-inch blocking is placed under the jack. After jacking the load another 2 inches, the 2-inch blocking can be replaced with a 4-inch timber, which forms part of the cribbing. This process is repeated until the desired height is reached. Always jack loads one end at a time and follow closely with blocking. Never jack loads one side at a time, as this will be far less stable than jacking the ends. If it's necessary to work under a load, or even reach under it while it's on the jacks, place safety blocking under the load as a precaution. Rollers can be used for moving loads horizontally or on slight inclines, in situations where the floor or ground surface is even. They allow loads to be moved while only a few inches off the ground, and the force required is considerably less than hoisting. Rollers may be aluminum or steel round stock, heavy steel pipe, or a manufactured caster unit. Cylinder-type rollers are generally 2 to 3 inches in diameter. Whatever type is used, the bearing pressure on the floor or ground surface must be considered. Many floors have been damaged by riggers failing to anticipate these high pressures. The bearing capacity of a floor is a function of its intended use, its size, and its general condition, among other factors. The area should be carefully inspected at the planning stage of the move. Bearing pressure on the surface can be reduced by using more rollers and large steel or aluminum mats to distribute the stress. The most important consideration in rolling operations is control of the load. Make sure that all equipment, including slings and hardware, is sufficient to handle the loads that will be developed in all stages of the operation. It's a good idea to have a secondary means of restraint to allow for the unexpected. The cylinder-type roller is useful for short-distance moves or where the load will have to negotiate corners. The rollers can be placed on angles to swing the ends of the load, allowing it to turn in tight areas. Caster-type rollers have the advantage that they don't have to be continually repositioned in front of the load. They operate with caterpillar-like action and roll freely under load. These rollers are available with capacities ranging from 4 to 500 tons and can be equipped with swivel tops for turning and positioning loads. When there isn't enough headroom for a crane, and winches and tackle systems are insufficient to lift a load vertically, it may be necessary to erect an inclined plane and roll or skid the load up. The force required to move the load can be calculated in the following way. Measure the vertical distance that the load will be lifted and the horizontal run of the ramp. The slope of the ramp is then the rise over the run. The pull required to raise the load is the weight of the load times the slope plus 5% of the load weight to allow for friction. Let's look at an example. A 15-ton compressor is to be raised 10 feet. A ramp has been built with a horizontal run of 50 feet. The slope of the ramp is 10 divided by 50, or 1/5. So the force required is then 15 tons times 1/5 plus 5% of 15. This is equal to 3 tons plus 3/4 of a ton to allow for friction. Therefore, the required pull is 3 3/4 tons. If a winch is being used, its rated capacity for vertical lifting should be used rather than its horizontal capacity, so that an adequate margin of safety can be maintained. In recent years, jacking towers and portable gantries have been developed to hoist and carry one-piece loads weighing hundreds of tons. Although they require an appreciable amount of setup time, this time can often be saved by eliminating the need for disassembly of the load into manageable pieces. Jacking towers use hydraulically actuated pawls that engage climbing ladders on the side. The gantries operate using large telescoping hydraulic cylinders. Both types run on horizontal tracks powered by hydraulic cylinders that grab the rails. As an alternative to rollers, skidding systems have been developed to move loads horizontally. Using two-way hydraulic rams and notched rails, the system works on a ratchet principle, alternately pushing the load and drawing the cylinders along. Skidding systems allow precise placement of the load while maintaining control at all times. Since they are operated remotely, there is no need to have workers near the load while it is moving. Let's take a look at some of the main points covered in this session. Don't use jacks for long-term support. Blocking and cribbing is much more stable. Make sure timbers used for cribbing are long enough to distribute the load over a large enough area and provide sufficient stability. Crib height should not exceed the length of the timbers used. Always jack loads one end at a time and follow closely with blocking. Make sure you have control of the load at all times during rolling operations. Use a backup system to allow for the unexpected. The force required to move a load up an incline is the weight of the load times the slope plus 5% of the load weight to allow for friction. By now, you should be familiar with the characteristics and safe use of jacks, blocking, rollers, and inclined planes, as well as some of the specialized systems for moving large loads. Further information is available from your Construction Safety Association of Ontario.